Welcome to another exciting episode of Access Granted, where we talk about evolution of identity security and learn from various modern trends around how identity security is evolving in a multi-cloud hybrid world, and especially because of the newer non-human identity and agentic AI use cases, distributed cloud environments. Identity has become a key top of the mind for many CISOs and identity leaders. So today we are going to be talk about I call it a static credential crisis, and we'll talk about how do you fix access in a hybrid world, which could mean any of the clouds, data centers, and AI agents. So think from that angle that let's say if you are work in a security or infrastructure, here is I wouldn't say it's a scary thought, but maybe something to be concerned about is your AI agents and Jenkins pipelines and legacy databases might all still be running with the same always on admin key from the last quarter, right? This is a very real world scenario, and a lot of focus has been made on human access and putting guardrails around how do you human accesses. That's basically a solved problem for the most part. Execution may be different, but in terms of solutions, there are a lot of thought has gone into those human access. But now, with static credentials like keys, tokens, and secrets, and it's just not a risk, but it's also a crisis for many organizations. And now they span, wide array of compute and resources and data centers and clouds. So how do you manage that risk that you have is the topic of today. And today, I'm really excited to have Matt Wilson, uh, Britive Product Management, to be our guest for today. And he's also works very closely with obviously our Britive's customers, large enterprises, as well as a lot of analysts who are looking to evolve and modernize the definition of what identity and privilege access means, how is zero standing privilege is taking shape. So we'll talk about demystifying what ZSP means and how should enterprises go about implementing or improving their security posture in this modern world of identity and security. Matt, welcome to the show. Really excited to have you here.
Thanks, Nauman. Glad to be here.
Fantastic. So I think we have a really good topic on our hand, and a lot of evangelists and industry professionals in identity and security here have asked me this question about what, why this problem even exists, why this remains such a stubborn problem of having to deal with standing access in both modern and legacy environments.
Yeah, I think a lot of this just has to do with history. So if you think of kind of the traditional models, you and I have been doing this for a long time. So you remember you would join a new organization, maybe you change roles, and the first thing you need is access to a system. So what does somebody do? They go and they create an account for you, username, password. Maybe it's a little bit more complex on the login side, but essentially you're just given a credential to get access to a resource. And that basically lives for forever until somebody decides to remove it. So if you, let's say you change groups or you leave the organization, somebody would have to remember to take that access away, to deactivate or delete that account. Now, there were tools to automate some of this, but I think the difference is as we've moved towards a very cloud first environment in a lot of organizations, things are kind of fundamentally different. So a lot of what's going on in the cloud environments, they're not humans logging into servers. They're things like automated processes, they're workloads. They're things that may live for days, hours, even, minutes or seconds sometimes. And so you can't really use these old models of static standing credentials to have these things that have such a short lifespan. And you certainly don't want to leave these things lying around because you're generating, dozens or potentially hundreds of times more what are effectively identities than you had in this old world.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's also define zero standing privilege clearly for the audience, right? And why, what makes it different? How is it different than traditional PAM? And obviously now this is a new, I would say, buzzword or acronym. And as expected, many legacy vendors have also started to adopt a ZSP in their narrative and their marketing approaches. So it might be good for our audience to really understand what ZSP stands for or what is the actual philosophy behind it. And What makes it different from the traditional approaches of doing privileged access?
Absolutely. And it's a great question to ask because interestingly enough, this term has been around for several years. If you really look at even some of the analysts were talking about it, the early 2020s, but I think it's really become top of mind with a lot of zero trust initiatives and this realization that this is I would say, a critical path forward for identity management, especially like we're talking about with some of these cloud spaces. So ZSP really just means zero standing or static, however you want to just say it, privileges or permissions. So what it means is that you don't have permissions just sitting out there on a system. You're only given them when you need them, and then they're taken away afterwards. So if you want to think of a really simple example, you have, let's say, like a banking application, right? Or you log into your local bank. That's some sort of credentialed access. Regardless of whether you're logging into your bank, you probably, if you're like me, maybe you check it once a week, every couple of weeks to pay a bill. Well, your account still has permissions to do all the things. Transfer money between accounts, maybe send it externally, pay bills, that kind of stuff. That's that standing access. So it's the permissions to do something inside of a system. And that's really where the risk comes from. It's permissions that are in some sort of a system when the person who is authorized to have those permissions is really just not using them most of the time. That's really where that risk surface comes from. And it applies, I should say, to humans as well as things that are not humans, like automations, workloads, all this kind of stuff.
Got it. So just to add to this, then what it actually means that if you look at some of the traditional approaches, right, which relies on vaults and static permissions and credentials and password rotation, even though the user may be just in time given access or impersonate those service accounts or static credentials, it may not be considered a ZSP model because you have static permission and standing privileges somewhere that exists for those assets that you're trying to protect. Am I correct?
That's right. So this is where a lot of the confusion comes in. And I think they're kind of two related terms that get conflated a lot. So one of them is JIT, or just in time. Just because the access is given to the user just in time does not mean that there are, in fact, zero standing privileges. So to your example, if I have a static account, but the credentials are only sort of unlocked for me as the end user because maybe I can't see the password. This is kind of the old way of doing a lot of privileged access management. There's still probably an administrator account. So if anybody ever gets a hold of that username and password, they can log in and have full admin access. Just as an end user, I'm only given sort of that just-in-time unlocking of the credentials for me. But that's not true CSP. So there are multiple different ways to do it, but it's that zero static that's important. So if you want to think about it this way, if I log into a system and I can do anything, there's a privilege there and it is static. Now, it's okay to have sometimes like read-only access, but when you have that full access 24/7, that's where all that risk comes from. And a lot of just in time is not necessarily zero standing privileges.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, very clear. Thanks, Matt. So let's bring this into a little bit more real world, right? So, what do you think would be some of the examples of how this dynamics plays out in a custom environment? Let's say large scale AWS environment, or it could be a hybrid environments or traditional, including traditional on prem.
Great question. So, when we've gone into especially new customers, we may see things like thousands of IAM roles at AWS that exist for, questionable reasons. Like maybe somebody was running a one-time test. Maybe there was something required for part of an application deployment that isn't actually part of the software anymore. So there's a lot of cleanup that just never happens. And that access still persists. Just because it's not being used doesn't mean it cannot be used, especially by, let's say, a malicious actor where they get a hold of those credentials. It's very common now to see this with just sort of the speed with which engineering and DevOps teams work. You'll get things like persistent credentials, static access tokens, or security certificates that are hard coded maybe into like CI pipelines. So it could be a GitHub action or GitLab Runner or a Jenkins job, things like that. And it really just kind of compounds with all of these different ways to access these resources. And they're almost treated as throwaway. But the problem is, if you create it once and never revisit it again, but don't actually destroy it, you're just creating this huge surface area of potential attack. And in fact, I would say that's what we see really kind of as almost the rule, not the exception these days when we first go into a lot of these environments.
Yeah, and a lot of it is because a lot of businesses, they want to innovate fast. They want to bring products quickly to the market, and a key part of that is developer efficiency, right? So give them as simple environment, as agile environment as possible, and let security not be the roadblock. And I think it's very hard traditionally to find that right balance where security almost becomes an enabler to innovation as opposed to a roadblock to innovation. And we are in this situation where you wanted to give developers efficiency, you want to go things or build things faster and bring it to the market, but now you are in this mess where all the security breaches and risks are happening specifically because of identity credentials. People are finding things, and the threat actors are scanning all day long the public repos, and it's becoming a key risk issue. It almost becomes like a shadow IT, but for
Exactly.
identity world. That's what it's. So we have to be ahead of this thing.
Exactly. And that's a great point too about the breaches, right? Because it seems every other day there's some major breach, but when you look at it, such a high percentage, it's not because it was an advanced nation state, exploiting 0 days or whatever. Because they, like to your point, they scanned a bunch of public cloud services or repos and found some old static key and used that as an initial point, and then we're able to pivot throughout the environment. So it's this huge latent risk surface from all of the identities have the static access that provides an easy entry point into your cloud environments.
Okay, great. So let's say if I am a customer, I'm a CISO, I'm a leader in the infrastructure and identity access management. I subscribe to this new philosophy of privileged access and zero standing privilege foundation. So what are some of the evaluation criteria, or what should I be looking when I'm evaluating all these vendors who are claiming to be cloud native and modern? Can you give us 3 or 4 anchor points that decision maker can look at while evaluating whether this is the right approach for the business or not?
So I would say first, one thing that we didn't really touch on is zero trust. A lot of people like to talk about zero trust. There's many of those initiatives. I would argue that if you do not have a true zero standing privileges model in place, you're not really fully doing zero trust. You can do sort of we'll say the 5 or the 10%. The majority of it is you have to have the sort of just in time verified application of your privileges, really your authorization. And it's every time you have to remove it. So with that said, the first thing you need to look at is the solution actually going to eliminate standing access? If it's not, and they're saying it's just in time, well, are they actually taking the permissions away? Are they removing the account? Are they removing the entitlements? Whatever it is, that's key thing number one, is really understanding, is it a true zero standing privileges solution? The second thing that I would look at is it has to be for both your human users and everything that's not a human. So bots, service accounts, your federated workloads and cloud environments, automation scripts, CI pipelines, all those things you need to make sure, because it doesn't really matter. An attacker doesn't care if it's a human or a non-human credential. It's whatever gets them access,
Yeah.
right? And this is not just usernames and passwords, it's tokens, it's security certificates, it's really any sort of credential that can get you privilege to a system. I would also look at, is it able to support a very broad range of environments? Cloud native, you have to have that these days. Even if you're not ready for the cloud, or you're just starting that cloud journey, you need it to be cloud native or cloud native ready so that you can future proof that journey. But at the same time, many, many businesses out there continue to have legacy environments. So this could be traditional on-prem equipment. It could be virtualized that's already kind of put into a cloud environment. You want something that's going to work across both. I would also look at what's the ease of deployment. So if you've got things that require heavy network re-architecture, maybe like a proxy, or that requires kind of a one-to-one, like a connector or an endpoint agent, those can be effective tools, but they're going to be very heavy weight to get into an environment because it's going to require a lot of cross coordination between IT, security, resource owners, and the time to value is going to be very high. So if you can find something lightweight, cloud native, and doesn't rely on additional software, I think that would be ideal. And I would say the final thing that I would add is it going to scale and sort of future proof your business needs? So you are looking for a solution that you can see, even if you're just starting with one small area of your business, one small footprint, is it something that you can grow and expand to encompass, I would say, ideally every identity in every environment in the future, even for these emergent use cases like the explosion of AI agents. It's too early to tell where this is all going to net out, but those are more just non-human identities with some unique use cases around them. Is the core functionality of the solution going to be able to grow into that over time?
Those are great points, Matt. And I think so overall, if I have to recap this, then it's almost the first thing you should look for is there should not be any static credentials, whether it's vendor managed or whether it's customer managed. That should be like a no-go for many modern use cases because it creates huge risk to your security posture, or especially you want to build that modern looking zero trust and zero standing privilege posture. And then other things are more about having a unified solution because CISOs have already have too many tools to deal with. So why have one tool for human and other tool for non-human, right? It just does not make sense, right? And then you are trying to learn policy model and training for different teams for different identities. So having a unified solution that works nicely, integrates nicely with the rest of the vendors in the ecosystem, I think is a force multiplier, right? And having something future proof which will work for your non-human agentic AI workflows, because then you can build your operational discipline around one platform, and then you continue to future proof it as new use cases keeps emerging. So it makes a lot of sense to me. Thanks for that. Another question I have, right, is in your role you work a lot with the analysts from Gartners and other well-reputed organizations. How are they evolving their definition of privileged access? And I'm sure that they are learning it from customers as well. They're learning from different product vendors as well. Where do you see this direction and evolution from analyst perspective go to from identity security perspective?
Ooh, that's a good question. There seems to be an evolution that's almost kind of coming full circle. So that traditional notion of privileged access management in many cases was really just vaulting credentials, keeping things separate from the users and kind of, it was all sort of like hiding the access from them until they needed it. And when it came to some of the newer use cases, what seemed like was happening was there were new categories or sort of extensions. I'll say the CIEM or KIM was one of them, which was really focused a lot more on sort of the non-human cloud entitlement side of things. It was kind of sort of like PAM for, for cloud NHIs, but not quite. And what I've really seen over the last year is many of the tenants like ZSP. So again, there's analysts were talking about this from 2020, 2021, but I think it was in a context that was a little bit divorced from modern approaches to privileged access management that was really kind of inclusive of the cloud. And so the full circle is, I think they recognize the old models are not really where things need to be, but the new model that they've come up with, it's not really separate categories. It's updating the terms and the definitions. So it's going to be grounded in CSP. It's going to be human and non-human. It has to cover cloud use cases as well as the existing legacy use cases, right? Access to servers, databases, maybe even networking equipment. Like that's still very important, but they're not different. I think that's kind of the biggest shift that I'm seeing is they're really recognizing it's very holistic and it has to include that dynamic future version. That's kind of the tip of the spear as opposed to kind of a bolt on or something separate.
That's great response. Now let's pivot into something that you think and try to solve for our customers on a day-to-day basis. So looking at all these industry trends and how industry is shifting and what needs are based on the real pain that customers are seeing today, what is the Britive approach to GSP and why you feel it's more realistic and practical for customer environments today?
Right. All right. You can make a product guy talk about his product. Well, I think first and foremost, Britive from the outset has taken a very different approach when it comes to a lot of these use cases.
Mhm.
So Britive it's fully SaaS. So it is a cloud native. It's not just a SaaS application. It is cloud native. It is built in the cloud for the cloud, but it is also able to extend into hybrid and even on-prem environments. And the reason that we chose to take that approach is we built from sort of the modern future use cases and worked our way backwards. So we're able to apply a lot of these new techniques like this ZSP first mindset even into traditional use cases where that's maybe not possible or feasible even with some of the existing tools. We wanted to be extremely fast time to value. So that's why we took an agentless, proxyless approach for the build out. And we support all the cloud majors out of the box. So AWS, GCP, Azure, Oracle Cloud, Kubernetes, all of those are really where we shine. And we've been able to take again and extend that to traditional infrastructure such as databases, servers, even homegrown custom applications. But it's that same sort of baselining of ZSP at the end of the day. And importantly, because we were so focused on cloud first as an initial sort of set of use cases, we have first level support for the non-human side of things, as well as the human side. I think it's much harder to build kind of bolt on the NHI piece from what I've seen if you're focused purely on human identities because the behaviors are very different. Things like federated workloads in the clouds, that's not something a human identity would do. So you have to really kind of tackle that with purpose. And that's what we've done from the outset.
How does the customers realize the benefit? Let's say if somebody who has this problem, they deploy Britive, how quickly they start to see benefit, and normally how does those benefits itself in terms of value to the customer that you have seen? Maybe give one example of a customer that you may have.
Yeah. So I think one that comes to mind is well, we won't say the name here. It's a Fortune 500 fintech customer.
Mm.
And this has been a great, I would say, kind of example use case where we were able to go in and take over 2,000 administrative roles. So that's not just
Wow.
roles, these are specifically admin roles across a very massive environment, which included, um, I think, all four of the cloud majors, and reduce that to 50 or so just in time, zero standing privilege access profiles is what we call them in Britive. And the key piece here is we did that in about a month.
Wow. Beautiful.
This wasn't a 6 month to a year kind of a process. And what even really kind of added to this is they were able to improve their audit posture because everything inside of the Britive platform, it's fully logged, it's fully audited. So you know exactly who did what, when access was requested and when. And it gave them, you had brought this up earlier, the engineering teams, I think, are always a little bit worried whenever they hear a new security tool is going to be implemented.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We have made great efforts to integrate not just with an open API, but we have a lot of tools that are very developer friendly, like a CLI tool, which really let them kind of accelerate their DevOps team because we were able to take some of the friction out while still maintaining compliance with these security guardrails and access to these just-in-time policies that would temporarily elevate the access that they needed and then take it away automatically. And it fits seamlessly with their workflows. So no waiting, no filing tickets.
Yeah.
It just worked.
That's super slick. Beautiful story. It's great that you highlighted that. I think people will find it very useful. One connected question that normally people always ask, let's say, you tell them, how you can improve your posture, how can you can bring this new approach to doing privileged access. And they ask a question that I have already have a brownfield environment. I have, large number of users and developers in this space. It might already be a mess, right? So how do I basically approach Brightif? Is it too much of a hassle to introduce something new and innovative in this brownfield, or does your customer find it easy to adopt?
Yeah, great question. So again, going back to the fact that we're a SaaS platform, and if you want to get up and running, there's nothing to deploy. We really focus on quick time to value, and we recommend just kind of a crawl, walk, run approach. It can be overwhelming. Like you said, if you have a huge brownfield environment, there's going to be thousands of accounts across however many systems. You should really kind of take stock of what are your highest risk environments. So you probably have some, administrative or full access roles for things like it could even be some of your automations, right? A lot of the CI jobs do need very high level access to deploy things into cloud environments. But take stock of what you've got and kind of think, what would happen to my business if this particular credential were to get breached? And focus on those first and convert those into a ephemeral, just-in-time access policy.
Hmm.
Then you can remove the standing access. Basically, that's what Britive does is when you access these policies, we temporarily reinstate exactly what the access was before to the authorized user and then automatically revoke it. So just by narrowing the 24/7 access to, it could be as much as 99% of the time it's not enabled because you're not using that permission. That's really where we recommend people start. And so that's a little bit of a side note on this. A lot of people will tell you to focus on least privileged access. If you focus there first, that's way harder in a cloud environment because you may not know what are the privileges that if you're looking at a role, you could say, can I trim this, and this? Is it going to break an automation? Is it going to break, a production application? And at the end of the day, you still have static privileges with that model. If you go the zero standing privileges approach, make everything ephemeral, you don't have to go down that much harder, much longer pathway initially about least privilege access or kind of right sizing the permissions because you're taking the biggest immediate risk away. And then over time, you can start to you can right size, you can consolidate like the fintech customer did, and you can even look to extend it to lower risk applications or users inside of the environment. But really, you just kind of decide what your risk threshold is, start with the greatest things, and then work your way down. So it's a journey, but you can get the most immediate value in a very short time frame.
That's very promising. That's very promising. And I think I'm sure that the people would feel good to hear that they can take on that new approach of doing security and improve their overall posture. So I love what GSP is trying to achieve. I love how Britive approached this identity security from a GSP foundation perspective. Where do you see all this heading? And as we look at the world of AI agents and ephemeral workloads, and behavior driven identity, what role do you think Britive will play in this new innovation? Obviously, I think looks like they already have a head start in terms of how the product is built, being cloud native and working for both human and non-human. So where do you see this innovation moving towards, and what can we expect from Britive in a near future?
Yeah, there's a lot in there. Of course, we've got the AI
A
aspect.
loaded question.
I think at the end of the day, we're just building on what we've already got. So ZSP is still going to be the foundation. What's interesting, especially with some of these use cases like AI agents, is whereas a service account or a cloud workload, it has a very defined behavior. The AI agent it's an NHI, it's a non-human identity, but it's going to be different based on its inputs. So if you give it open access to tools and data and systems just because it might need it, you're creating a huge potential surface area of attack and risk. So I think ZSP is going to be even more important in this new agentic world. And I think you're going to also see some evolution to that because these agents can be unpredictable. And even some of the use cases we probably haven't thought of yet, moving more towards a continuous authorization model. So I think people are fairly familiar with continuous authentication. Is it still me? Is it still me?
Yeah.
But continuous authorization is going to keep looking at, are you still allowed to do this? I know who you are, but have I changed my mind? Can you access that system or data? And I think that's going to be important, not just for the AI agents, but for human users as well. And I think this really shifts the decision points from a traditional, like an RBAC, a role-based model, to a behavior-based model. And, ultimately, it feels pretty close to these days. Maybe it's within a year or two. I think it's going to be difficult to tell if you're just looking from a data perspective, if it's a human or an AI agent doing something. So you need to make sure whatever system you have in place today is going to be capable of managing those authorization decisions and control points in the very near future. Because I think the last thing you want to do is start all over again.
Yeah. So I think it makes a lot of sense, and I can totally see adaptive authorization, continuous authorization, behavior based authorization, looking at deviation from the normal behaviors and let AI figure out, how to fine tune the access, maybe throw in MFA challenge or quarantine certain users, right? So before you know it, the platform should be able to take actions on your behalf with approvals, obviously, to stop breaches. That's where I think we want to not just show us, but do things for us that can stop breaches, almost like a automated security incident response. And if you have that capability of both visibility and enforcement, almost like an identity firewall, right? So things like, you can see things and you can block things through policy enforcement. Platform has a lot more potential to do things for you in the AI world as well. So beautifully articulated, Matt. Thanks a lot. So we are coming very close to top of our end of our podcast, and I want to basically leave the audience with two key takeaways, right? So what is two things that you want them to take away with?
Two key takeaways. I would say first and foremost, when you are evaluating a privileged access solution, really dig into the ZSP aspect of it. So just saying, oh yeah, I've got ZSP is not enough. So is it true ZSP, not just in time access? And does it cover all of your needs and use cases? So just because it does ZSP in a cloud environment doesn't mean it's going to work for your traditional infrastructure. Same goes for your human versus your non-human. You want something that basically kind of does everything. And then very closely related to that, I would say you want to make sure that you are picking a solution that is going to meet your needs today and into the future. So this is both about scale and setting you up for those future use cases that aren't going to have you looking for a replacement solution or another tool 6 months from now as the situation evolves. I think there's so much excitement, especially on the AI, the agentic side. Think about how that could affect your business and make sure what you're picking is forward-looking, not something that's kind of already out of date for those.
That's great. Thanks, Mac. This is really informative. I really appreciate you taking time and share your thoughts around identity security and clarifying some concepts on zero standing privileges. So that's a wrap for our podcast on static credential crisis. And these credentials, hard-coded API keys, secrets, tokens, they are some of the top causes of breaches, and they are everywhere. They're not restricted to one area or the other, whether it's legacy data centers, whether it's cloud, AI workloads, or modern pipelines. GSP is just more than a buzzword, and the shift is happening now. Writing is obviously, as Matt presented, is basically leading that shift based on the foundation of GSP, making it fast, scalable, and developer friendly. So security can be an enabler to the innovation as opposed to the roadblock. So thanks, audience, and looking forward to meeting you in the next podcast. Thanks, Matt, for attending. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.